Hello again, and welcome back to another edition of the Wiccan Conservative. Today I have for you a Georgia voter update. As far as you guys know, it is an election year here in Georgia. We have our Georgia 22 elections here on your screen. I am using Ballotpedia.org, and I'm going to briefly show you what is upcoming in Georgia for 2022, what we will be voting on, when we will be voting on it, and then I want to talk to you a little bit about the Secretary of State debate. Now, I don't know if a lot of people have had the opportunity to see this debate, so I'm going to go ahead and put that on your radar as well. But let's get into this right here on your screen. Georgia 2022 elections. What's on your ballot? You can actually go to this website and use it to find out exactly what is on your ballot, find out where your local precinct is, change your voter information, register to vote, do all different sorts of things on this website. And if you wanted to also use this link right here, you would be able to customize your particular ballot. It would give you all the information that you need to know pertaining to you in your local municipality, county, city, wherever it is that you're at. But let's take a look on this screen here at the 2022 Georgia elections. This is including offices on the ballot covered by Ballotpedia, election dates, and frequently asked questions. So these are the offices that are on the ballot. Anything that you see with a check mark next to it, it is up for legislation on this election cycle. So that would be the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House, governor, other state executive positions, state Senate, state House, special state legislative, state Supreme Court, intermediate appellate courts, school boards, municipal governments, ballot measures, and local ballot measures. So you really need, if you live in Georgia, to get onto this website and get onto the Georgia elections website as well and find out what measures and what ballot proposals are going to show up on your ballot. And you want to be familiar with this stuff before you actually go in to vote. Some of these measures are relatively long, and if you don't know what you're reading, it can take you extra time at the polls, or you can be confused. And once you get to the election site, nobody can help you unless you sign off on getting assistance at the polls. So there are a couple things that changed in Georgia this year when it comes to the election process. And you're going to see a lot of your poll workers cracking down on cellular devices, talking to spouses during your ballot casting procedures. They're not going to be able to help you. They really shouldn't be touching the machines once you get behind the velvet ropes to vote. Nobody should be looking at your screen. Nobody should be touching your screen but you. And I don't know what I can say about other counties, but I know here in my county, they really wanted to hit it home that they were not going to put up with any of the nonsense that was in and around the 2020 election. They're not going to deal with extra people being in the velvet rope area. They're just really going to be cracking down on anything and everything that can look or appear to look like fraud. So be aware of that when you get out to your election sites. The election dates in Georgia. Now, this is why this is so important and why I felt the need to address this, is because the election primary is coming up on May 24th. So early voting actually starts today. If you want to go down to your local precinct and cast an early ballot, early voting starts today. They have modified the hours for early voting as well in Georgia. I don't have the information here in front of me, but I know that they have made a compromise in the past legislative session where they are allowing early and weekend voting hours. So that has changed slightly, but I believe that it still looks pretty similar to the early voting in the past. But you will have some Sunday dates thrown in there, and I believe that there's some extended time on some of the dates for you to get in and actually cast your ballot in person early voting. June 21st, 2022 is another primary runoff. That's if you have a tie between your primary candidates, that they would need to go for a second election cycle, or what they call a runoff. November 8th is the general election, and then of course December 6th would be your general runoff. Again, if you were to come into some sort of tie, you would then go into a runoff. So further on, you will find the local election polling hours, and then of course your frequently asked questions as well. And this goes down to absentee ballot. Are there limits on who can request a ballot? The deadline for the ballots is May 13th. Postmark or receipt deadline has to say received by May 13th. And the mail return deadline is May 24th, 2022. So that has all of the information that you need to cast a vote here in Georgia. And also, this is not exclusive to Georgia. So if there's anybody out there that needs information on their particular states, Ballotpedia will give you all the information that you need for your states as well. Now, let's move on to what we're really here for, and that is the 2022 Georgia Secretary of State Republican primary debate. And this is between Jody Hice, TJ Hudson, David Bell-Al, and Brad Raffenspringer. If you haven't had a chance to go and watch this debate, I actually didn't know anything about it. It is hosted on Rumble by Voice of Rural America. And this debate is about 2 hours and 11 minutes long, but it's worth every single second. I was able to catch this on Friday. It happened to pop up in my syndication process of my videos between Rumble and YouTube. And whenever I saw it, I immediately clicked on it, because if you've lived in Georgia, or if you've been paying attention to anything election related since 2020, you will remember that Brad Raffenspringer played a detrimental part in the 2020 election hijinks, for lack of a better word. And I wanted to know what he had to say for himself, considering everything that he has said in every office meeting, confrontation, media appearance has been to cover his butt with what he conducted here in Georgia in regards to the 2020 election. And of course, this was a complete and utter failure for Brad, but I do believe that the other three candidates also brought some very interesting points to the matter. Now, me personally, I really, really enjoyed David Bell-Al. And another reason why I was excited to hear this debate is because I didn't know of anybody besides Jody Hice. I did not know that TJ Hudson or David Bell-Al existed, or even that they were running for this position. So they were able to hit on a lot of different topics. Now, again, this is a 2-hour debate. It's pretty amusing if you're into debates. The candidates themselves, really called out Raffenspringer for, I believe, the constituents of Georgia, and actually vocalized the concerns of a lot of people here in the state directly to his face. And it was very interesting and eye-opening to hear him respond in real time to what these accusations were and the things that happened. So they brought a couple things up. The pieces of legislation that actually got changed here in Georgia. So I haven't had a chance to look this up over the weekend because it was such a exciting weekend. It was a holiday weekend, and then this past end of the week was my husband's birthday, so we were extremely busy. But for you guys, if you wanted to take a look, apparently there is some data about the what is it called? It is the voters signature verification match percentage. So there was a lot of talk about how many signatures were vetoed for not matching the intended signature. So there's a signature on file here in Georgia with everybody's license, and it is supposed to be used in verifying your election or your ballot for election processes. Now, if you are familiar with Dinesh D'Souza, he has actual video footage taken from drop-off ballots locations where the ballots that are being dropped off are legitimately being signed in the car by the person dropping off the ballots. So this has been a huge issue and a debate in Georgia. And Raffenspringer referred back to HB 316 with the following percentages: that in 2018, the rejection rate for ballots were around 0.1%. And he claims that in 2020, the ballot rejection rate per signature match was up to 0.2%. And I really haven't had a chance to trace down these numbers yet, but I found it interesting to say the least, considering we now have video footage of at least one instance where it appears that the signatures were put onto dropped off ballots by whoever was dropping off those ballots, and therefore they could no way be matched to the people who were supposedly on those ballots as being legal voters. So I'm kind of curious as to where they got these numbers from. They also said that there were 250 drop boxes that had no chain of custody and no surveillance. And the most disturbing thing about these drop boxes and extended hours and COVID restriction things was that it was done by emergency power, that there wasn't an actual process that went through the legislator that had everybody sit down and draft a piece of legislation and then vote on it and go through the process, that these measures were enacted through emergency powers. And this equated to 6.9 million absentee ballots. So I believe they said something along 135 counties out of 139 had no answers to their Dropbox question. So when they went in to actually ask them where did the chain of custody come into play, who was monitoring these drop-off boxes, all these different questions about the integrity of the election, they weren't able to get answers from about 135 out of 139 counties. So they had, drop boxes, but they didn't have chain of custody. They didn't have the best surveillance, and they didn't have, any answers to any of the legitimate questions surrounding ballots in 2020. Another bill that they kept referring to was Senate Bill 202, and I believe that was the voters' rights bill. Jody Heiss had made a comment about this bill was to make it easier to vote and harder to cheat. That's what he called it, the easy to vote, harder to cheat bill. And again, it went to address some of the issues with the chain of custody and the drop boxes, the blanket of the absentee ballots, and those sorts of things, just to nip some of the issues that we had in 2020 in the bud. But realistically speaking, the damage has already been done. So this was in preparation for the upcoming election here in November. So we found out a couple other interesting things. There seems to be a lot of ex-Dominion employees in the governor's office. I believe it was Jody Heiss that kept bringing up a couple different people. I wrote down a couple different names on my list here that worked for Dominion and then ended up in the governor's office or in the Secretary of State's office in different departments. So go back through the video, and right around the 35-minute mark, give or take a couple minutes on either side, I would go before the 35-minute mark and let it play. But they mentioned this gentleman by the name of Gabe Sterling, and apparently he worked for Dominion and then ended up in the Secretary of State's office, if I remember correctly. TJ Hudson in this debate was kind of your down-home candidate. I felt kind of bad for him throughout this debate because he just didn't seem to be on the same level as his competitors. He seems to be more of a citizen than an office holder, which is not by any means a bad thing, but it just, kind of leaves you thinking, how much is he going to have to learn? How much could be accomplished by somebody who is still learning in the process if they were to get into this office? But he seems like a very upstanding gentleman who was very direct and straight to the point. He didn't have any fluff about him. He was very laser focused on his concerns. And ultimately, that was the biggest topic for debate, was the election. But there are also other jobs that are required of the Secretary of State that he may not have had the best answer for. Brad, of course, was Captain Deflective the entire debate. There were a lot of things that he was not allowed to discuss. He was not allowed to discuss much later on in the debate his phone call or his feelings about the phone call with former President Trump and all the things that are going on between him and supposedly Trump asking for votes and finding votes. That is currently in legislation, so he was not able to comment on that. He was also not able to comment on the Marjorie Taylor Greene situation and them trying to keep her off of the ballot due to her quote-unquote actions or feelings about the actions on January 6th. They discussed the Zuckerbucks. They discussed open records requests. They discussed the GBI, and that is the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, and discussed HB 1464, in which they attempted to make it easier for a citizen to challenge the election process. As you guys know, there were plenty of poll workers, poll watchers, citizens that came together and wrote affidavits in response to what they witnessed during the 2020 election, a lot of these affidavits were taken with a grain of salt and thrown out before they even really saw the inside of a courtroom. They were either told that they did not have standing to raise the claims that they were raising, or the claims could not be substantiated. So that was the huge issue that actually stopped a lot of the court proceedings prior to the Electoral College vote on January 6th. The other thing that came up during this particular part of the debate was the Fulton County ballots being destroyed, and the evidence that they were destroyed being tossed before it hit a courtroom. And anybody that is in the state of Georgia knows that Fulton County is a very prominent county, but they're also riddled with issues. So there is a big question as to what happened to these ballots. Now, what happens in Fulton County is if an absentee or mail-in ballot comes in and it is not legible or the ballot is marked improperly, they have specific people who recreate that ballot in a way that the machine can read and tabulate that ballot. But the problem is they destroyed the original ballots after they copied them. So I'm not exactly sure of the law. This was one of the debates in the debate. But so the original ballots were destroyed, or they are gone. At the end of the day, that just looks shady from the outside, because now we have a bunch of people who are contesting these results, and we have a sneaking suspicion that there were nefarious actors behind the scenes that may have manipulated or recreated ballots for whatever reason. And we would just like to have that hard copy original document to go back and solidify what we think, but we can't do that because they are gone. If you really want to see a cat fight between the boys, about an hour and 26 minutes in, the establishment, Jody Heiss, goes against the establishment, Brad Raffenspringer, and their back and forth is kind of funny if you want to get a good laugh. Jody is advocating for state power. And, you know, he asks a lot of really good questions of Brad. The three of them kind of really bullied Brad because of the poor job that he had done in the 2020 election, and for all the things that he let happen, all while claiming that this was his pride and joy, that the actual election process was the most free and fair in Georgia's history. His words, not mine. So they talked about the Fulton County ballots being destroyed. Brad defended his blanket requests for absentee ballots by claiming that it leveled the playing field. He also made sure to forward all of these requests out first-class mail. And I didn't notice this at the time, but David Ballot brought this up. And by forwarding that absentee request out through first-class mail, a lot of those ballots ended up getting forwarded to people who moved potentially out of state. So whenever you forward first-class mail, it goes directly to your forwarding address. So it wouldn't go back to the post office and then have the opportunity to be picked up by a post worker who said, oh, okay, well, if this got returned and that person doesn't live there anymore, then we're just going to go ahead and return this back to the election board. First class mail would forward that mail out of state. So that's actually an interesting question that David Ballot brought up, is why did we forward these requests out first class, knowing that they had the potential to be then sent out of state? Another interesting point that came up through the debate was the HAVA funds. HAVA funds were, I believe, election dollars that were raised by the Secretary of State's office. I can't remember off the top of my head what the acronym means, so look it up, but I believe that it is state money that is supposed to go into the Secretary of State's office to fortify the election process. Brad Raffenspringer used $300,000 for a commercial for voter education, and then he defended it. So I swear this man has nightmares about Stacey Abrams because of how paranoid he was, particularly about her and not the other three challengers standing on the stage in front of him. But I digress. Brad is married to the work that he has done here in Georgia because he believes that simply catering to the military aspect of Georgian society is the way to go. We do have a lot of military people here, don't get me wrong, but we are not all military affiliated here in this state, Brad. And while we appreciate your efforts to give some sort of perk or benefit through military licenses here in Georgia, we, the people, would also like some sort of integrity, especially when it comes to maybe our election process. We don't really require a whole lot or a whole lot of special perks, but just having some chain of custody, some requirements for identifying yourself on election day. And hey, why don't we just make it an election day instead of an election week? That would go a long way for us, but I digress. With about 10 minutes left to go in the debate, around 1:51 and 40 seconds, they did talk about the Trump call. And they talked about what Donald Trump was supposedly asking Brad Raffenspringer to do. And I told you before that he wasn't allowed to comment on that case, but that did not stop the other three from commenting on the situation. They all kind of had the same sentiment when it came to Brad and what he actually accomplished in his position. You know, right now he's under investigation. Brad is not doing very well when it comes to popularity, what he did to the president in regards to the information being leaked about the phone call right before the runoff here in Georgia. If you remember, there was a tie between Kelly Loeffler and Jon Ossoff, and I believe it was Perdue and Senator Warnock. And then the leak from Brad Raffenspringer's office occurred where he made accusations against Trump, and Trump supposedly asking for falsified ballots. And after the hit the fan, nobody really came out to vote, and the runoff went to the Democrats. We will never know if Brad had never leaked the information of that call, who would have turned out to vote. We don't know if that impacted it or did not impact it after seeing what we saw in the general election. But I digress. It was something that was brought to Brad Raffenspringer's attention throughout the debate. So the last thing that I wanted to mention was, again, there's another person. I counted 3 people who they mentioned by name had ties between Dominion and the governor's office and the Secretary of State's office, there was a lot of anomalies that happened under Brad Raffenspringer's watch that I believe the people here in Georgia will not tolerate. And of the 3 candidates that are remaining, you have a very concerned, upstanding citizen, you have a mayor, and you have what I believe to be an establishment Republican, all running for the Secretary of State's office. So we'll see how this plays out in the polls. Do not forget that you need to go to Ballotpedia, get your election information, be familiar with the proposals on your ballot, and get ready, because we are in an election year, and the only way that we can remain active and try to get our voices heard as well as possible is to remain active and informed about our election process. But that's all I have for you guys today. I will be hitting up some more topics throughout the week. Don't forget, Thursday nights at 8 o'clock is 2 Cauldrons and a Goat. Please go check us out and bear with us through our technical difficulties. I am handling the back end of the tech on that, and I do apologize. It will get better, I promise. But as far as everything else goes, I guess I will catch you guys on the next one.